I am 27 years old and go by AmITheA. This narrative chronicles my connection with my dad, from great to nearly non-existent. I was a perfect daughter for a man growing up. When I was 8, my parents split. Although I lived mostly with Mom, weekends with Dad were the best. We would hike, tinker around his house, and he would always tell me how proud he was. For this reason, what happened later on hurts greatly. Things started to change when I turned 13. Dad began courting Elaine, a woman with 2 children, Michael and Sarah. Sarah was 10 years old. Michael was 12. I was first rather eager. More folks to hang about then? Incorrect. Everything changed when they moved in. Elaine left her job to, as I say, focus on the kids. Dad, who already worked his tail off, had to put in more overtime to pay the bills. He was hardly here at all suddenly, and when he was, Elaine and her children's happiness dominated everything. Though I tried to follow the flow, it was clear I belonged not to their tiny family. Dinner talks revolved mostly around Michael's soccer events and Sarah's dance performances. My achievements, such as winning an essay contest or earning straight A's, were little noticed. Vacations fit their schedules, and I began to feel like an afterthought. I recall one summer I wanted to see my grandparents, but Elaine suggested we attend a theme park as Sarah had never been to one. Guess whose plans were called off? High school was when things went from terrible to worse. Dad had been saving money for a college fund since I was small. Though it wasn't a full ride or anything, it was expected to be somewhat helpful. Then, in my junior year, Mom informed me Michael's private school tuition had been paid for from funds. Elaine persuaded Dad that he needed a better environment, because Michael was having trouble adjusting to public school. I didn't even hear from Dad, by the way. The news was broken by Mom. When I eventually faced Dad, he stated Michael needed it more, and we would work things out for my college. We didn't, with a hint of spoilers. Dad hardly helped. He always claimed he was broke. Mom ended up borrowing loans to support me. Dad missed my high school graduation about this time. That same day, Sarah participated in a dancing competition. Elaine persuaded her that her event was more significant. I recall not seeing him in the audience while seated in the auditorium studying it. He hardly called at all, and when he did, he seemed as though it was not really important. I had virtually ceased visiting Dad's place by the time I started college. Every time I went over, I felt like I was invading. Elaine would make these disparaging remarks about how so busy I was that I neglected time for family dinners. Naturally, the dinners still revolved mostly around Michael and Sarah. Every attempt I made to discuss my own life was dismissed. I once acknowledged finding difficulty in a demanding subject, and Elaine started talking about Michael's med school ambitions right away. It was as though I never really existed. I made attempts to correct things. I would suggest lunch with just Dad, but somehow Elaine and the kids usually ended up going along. Dad would tell me I was too sensitive, or that I was misinterpreting things if I ever mentioned how alienated I felt. It was like pounding my head against a stone wall. Though it developed gradually, the bitterness finally struck me when I considered how many promises Dad had violated. Though his actions stated otherwise, he used to assure me I was his first concern. Elaine made sure I understood my place in their family, that of the outside observer looking in. I received a generic gift card one Christmas when Michael and Sarah were getting these thoughtful, customized gifts. Though I tried to ignore it, it stung. I stopped trying finally as well. Every contact with Dad seemed like a reminder that Elaine's children were more vital than me. He seemed to overlook how far I would grow, or if he did, he didn't seem to care enough to act about it. Our relationship was barely hanging by a thread when I graduated from college. Looking back, losing my relationship with my dad wasn't the toughest thing. He was beginning to see nothing wrong about the way things had gone. Though his behavior obviously suggested otherwise, he really felt he was being fair. Elaine, also, she always made sure I understood exactly where I belonged in their family. On the outside, observing in. My contact with Dad had dropped to the sporadic text or holiday card following college. Still, I clung to this small shard of optimism that things would turn around. That hope suffered much when I learned from pictures on social media about his 50th birthday celebration. It was more than just a laid-back supper or whatever. It was this grand, lavish celebration with decorations, cuisine, and what appeared to be a live band. Along with a lot of extended family, Elaine, Michael, and Sarah were there. Who else wasn't? To find out why I hadn't been invited, I phoned Dad. He dismissed it at first, believing it had to be a mistake. Then he blamed Elaine, saying she had taken care of the guest list and must have overlooked including me. Forgotten. Right, the images spun a different narrative. Every element of that celebration screamed, carefully planned. Yet his own kid hadn't made the cut somehow. He promised to make it up to me, but shockingly, I never heard from him following that. Not long thereafter, Sarah became engaged. And speculate on how I learned about her engagement party? Once more, on social media. I didn't even give Dad a call this time. It felt intentional at this point since I knew the drill. He would pretend Elaine had arranged it and forgotten me, claiming it was a small gathering. I lacked the strength, though, to approach him. Realizing I had been kicked from the family group chat delivered the last blow. I only realized as a cousin brought up a family cookout I knew nothing about. I checked, and my phone showed the chat gone. When I approached my cousin about it, she appeared somewhat awkward, saying something about how Elaine had most likely cleaned the chat to help it be more under control. From then on, I learned about family occasions, either from social media posts or secondhand. Seeing how unhappy I was, my mother urged me to confront it head-on, rather than allowing the bitterness to fester. Though I wasn't convinced it would help, I resolved to give it one more attempt. Unannounced, one Saturday, I drove to Dad's place. Elaine at the door responded. She seemed startled, and remarked it wasn't a good time as they were in the middle of something. I could hear people and laughter from the backyard. Still another event I hadn't been invited to. She invited me nowhere at all. A few days later, my cousin told me Dad had purchased Michael a brand new automobile for his birthday. The same man who had claimed financial difficulties while I was in college could hardly help with my tuition. The automobile was a sparkling new SUV, the kind you might find a parent giving a child as a prize for something significant. To get through college, I had been working part-time jobs and borrowing money. Around this time, I began therapy since I felt as though I was carrying an intolerable weight. My therapist guided me in separating a lot of the uncertainty and hurt I had been experiencing. Dad's actions were clearly not random. They were a pattern. Every choice he made seemed to put Elaine and her children first, while I was at most an afterthought. Dad turned it around on me when I at last plucked up the bravery to contact him and face him about everything. He stated I was blowing everything out of proportion and jealous of Michael and Sarah. It resembled talking to a wall. He didn't pay attention to any of the particular instances I presented, that of missing my graduation or the college fund. Rather, he discounted my worries as my being too sensitive. A few close pals I vented to were all on my side. Dad's behavior was inappropriate, they agreed, and they urged me to establish limits. I started considering what that would look like for the first time. Thanksgiving counted as the last straw. Dad spent it with Elaine's extended family, and once more I wasn't invited. He apologized weakly by text when I brought it up, saying he hadn't understood I would feel excluded. With him, it was a pattern, speaking the very minimum to keep things calm, but never really trying to improve. Elaine phoned me a few days later. She thought I was treating Dad unfairly, and openly accused me of stressing their family out. That call had almost ridiculous chutzpah. She obviously only wanted me to quit rocking the boat. She was not interested in solving anything. It dawned on me at that. Every effort I had taken to mend the connection had been one-sided. Rebuilding what we had lost did not appeal to Dad. The dynamic as it was made him comfortable, and I was the only one battling to alter it. It was draining. I stopped being able to do it. I choose to totally back off. I reminded myself I wouldn't get in touch once again until he proved he was ready to meet me midway. I began first paying more attention to my own mental health than to trying to hang on to a relationship that obviously didn't matter to him. I told Dad straight out that I wouldn't participate unless he really tried to have me included in his family after resolving to distance myself from him. I was simply seeking the same fundamental respect and acknowledgement Michael and Sarah received without issue. I wasn't asking for much. I emailed him outlining this and bugs, days extended into weeks, then months. He stopped entirely from getting in touch. It first seemed like a relief. There is no more half-hearted apology or contemptuous justification. But the silence became intolerable with time. Over this period, my mother was my rock. She urged me to concentrate on the elements of my life under my control: my job, my friendships, and my interests. Her encouragement helped me to begin giving my work my whole attention. It turned out to pay off. A few months later, I was promoted with increased responsibilities and a pay raise. For the first time in a long time, I felt as though I was on firm ground, creating a life free from Dad's approbation. I started hearing rumors from extended family. Just when I believed everything had calmed down, Elaine had been disparaging me, calling me selfish and unappreciative, spreading gossip about me. I was the one separating the family, she said. She had deftly omitted any reference to the years of seclusion and failed promises. Elaine had been guiding Dad's actions from the start, so one of my cousins drew me aside at a family gathering and confirmed what I had been hypothesizing for some time. She had allegedly urged him to concentrate on Michael and Sarah, since following their parents' divorce, they needed stability. I suppose stability didn't apply to me. My therapist advised Dad to draft a letter. The intention was to express all I had been experiencing, free from the pressure of an instantaneous reply. It was about closing doors for me, not about persuading him to change. I poured my heart into the letter, listing every occasion I felt passed over and replaced. I didn't forward it straight away as I finished, not sure whether I would ever. A few weeks later, my mailbox turned over a wedding invitation. Sarah sent it. Just the conventional card with the date, time, and venue. The envelope lacked even a personal note. It seemed like a secondary concern, like someone realized they needed to invite me last minute to prevent looking awful. I resolved not to go. I knew it would simply be another occasion when I would feel like an alien. Refining the invite set off another drama cycle. Dad called me, charging me with being conceited and petty. He demanded that I go to the wedding to keep the peace, and said it wasn't fair to Sarah to drag our issues into her special day. It was the same script he'd used for years. Everything was about keeping Elaine and her kids happy, no matter how much it cost me. Not out of spite, but more because I felt unwelcome. I told him I wasn't attending the wedding. He didn't appreciate it. Once Elaine started using social media, things got more intense. She didn't specifically identify me, but it was clear who she was referring to when she tweeted this protracted passive-aggressive tirade about unappreciative family members unable to put aside their egos for one day. While several extended relatives responded to agree with her, a few messaged me personally to express their support. One aunt told me she respected my self-awareness in refusing to let Elaine's pranks rule me. During this period, I rely mostly on my therapist and friends. They reminded me that, even if it offended some, I was right to create limitations. Their encouragement enabled me to keep to my choice in the face of Dad's guilt-tripping and internet drama. Then arrived the flash of insight. I came to see I was done putting up with emotional manipulation and contempt. For those who obviously didn't regard me, I wasn't going to keep stooping over backwards. So be it if Dad and Elaine chose to cast me as the villain. I was not going to squander any more effort to show them my value. Not out of wrath, but more because I had to speak my piece once and for once. I began getting ready for a last confrontation. This time, it was about finding closure, and at last, closing this chapter behind me, not about saving the relationship. I thought it was time to meet with Dad personally, but without Elaine lurking about. I wanted to arrange everything. I wanted to get it all off my chest rather than try to mend it. I phoned him and said that we meet in a neutral venue, a cafe not far from his place. He consented, but I could tell he wasn't exactly delighted about it. I never wasted any time when we got together. I began with the most obvious problems: the years of exclusion, the unfulfilled promises, the ongoing preference toward Elaine's children. I didn't hold back, going over every instance that had wounded me, from skipping my graduation to him spending my college budget for Michael's fancy school. I compiled everything. Dad sat there silently, but as I spoke, his attitude changed from uncomfortable to defensive. He slumped back in his chair and stated he'd done his best when I finished. He claimed it was more about ensuring Michael and Sarah felt supported than about substituting me, saying Elaine encouraged him to give her children top priority since they needed stability following the divorce. He blamed her for some of the choices. He brushed aside my observation that his decisions had rocked my life, claiming I had my mother to lean on. That's when I started talking about the money. Years later, I questioned him about how he explained using my college funds for Michael's tuition and then purchasing him a brand new car. His justification was he considered me better off, with my mother managing my bills. Saying I was smart and hardworking and would figure things out, he added he expected I wouldn't miss the money. His easy dismissal of it, as if it were no great issue, astounded me. Elaine turned up before I could say anything else. She strolled right to our table and sat down, so she had to have known about the conference. She began berating me for being unappreciative and self-serving without pausing. She asserted I was trying to guilt-trip Dad and attacking him. Her swooping in to shape the story and make her the victim followed the same pattern I had witnessed for years. By then, I would have had enough. Rising, I collected my luggage and said to them both, I was done. I was not going to sit there and let Elaine spin the discussion into another pity party for her and her children. Dad phoned after me, but I continued on walking. I was not going to commit more of my time or energy to them. A few days later, I began receiving notes from relatives. A few of them had heard about the conference and contacted to provide their support. A few even expressed regret for not intervening sooner, acknowledging they had seen how I was treated, but not wanting to become involved. It was mixed feelings. Although some confirmation felt good, it also made clear how long I had been coping with this by myself. Then Dad sent me an SMS ultimatum. He advised me to accept the family as it is, or run the danger of being cut off totally. It stung, not surprising, but still stung. I didn't reply. I decided instead to go no contact with him totally. I banned Elaine's number as well as Michael's and Sarah's. Drama and backtracking were not something I wanted any longer. Elaine could not, of course, leave it alone. She started posting more on social media, leaving vague remarks regarding entitled family members who don't know how to let go of the past. Some extended family members joined in, liking and remarking in agreement, but others messaged me privately to indicate they were on my side. I turned aside everything of it. Engaging would just give her more gasoline. My therapist and friends started to be my lifeline in the meantime. They reminded me that severing links was more of a means of self-preservation than of selfishness. I began once more paying close attention to my job and developed a new passion for photography. It developed into a means of focusing my efforts towards something artistic and rewarding. My therapist noted my development in one of our sessions of treatment. She noted that establishing limits, even difficult ones, is evidence of development. I felt, for the first time in years, that I was writing my own tale, rather than allowing Dad and Elaine to write it. A few weeks later, I at last chose to forward the letter I had penned to Dad. It was not about peacemaking. I knew the ship had passed. The letter served as my means of closing the chapter and of stating everything I needed to without anticipating a reply. I sent it and turned around, not looking. That letter signaled the end of my emotional participation in the marriage. Now I was not expecting an apology or hoping for change. Whether with or without my dad, I was ready to go forth. I didn't expect a sincere response or any kind of spectacular gestures once I wrote that letter to Dad. Deep down, though, some part of me felt I may at least get a text, an apology, something. Nothing surfaced. Days stretched into weeks, and the quiet simply confirmed what I already knew. He was not going to change. The absence of a reply confirmed my choice to proceed forward. I began by totally severing relationships. Elaine, Michael, and Sarah were unfriendly and blocked on all social media. Their posts did not appeal to me, and I wanted no one else snooping on mine. Not long after, I learned of Elaine's response. The irony wasn't lost on me when extended family members began contacting me to let me know she was enraged, calling me immature, and accusing me of trying to erase the family. That same woman had been excluding me for years. Not long after, Dad tried to moderate. He messaged me, not to reconcile, but rather chastised me for producing unnecessary drama by blocking his wife and stepchildren. He said it was rude and charged me with making everyone's life more difficult. I answered with a brief, strong response, underlining once more that I had no desire in keeping ties with those who treated me less than family. I left it at that. His only reply was a nebulous remark on how I would regret cutting ties someday. Unbelievably, a couple of aunts and uncles contacted us personally to show their support. They assured me they knew why I had removed myself and even expressed their own annoyance with Elaine's actions over the years. One aunt stated she hadn't wanted to get involved, even though she'd always felt Elaine had an agenda to drive me out. Their letters provided a little solace, a reminder that not every member of the family considered me as the villain Elaine was depicting. I turned myself into my work in the meantime. Although the earlier promotion had come with extra obligations, I discovered that focusing on my work was a nice diversion. My work was not overlooked. My supervisor began to acknowledge me, and a few months later I was assigned the lead on a significant project. Having something in my life totally mine, apart from the drama involving Dad's relatives, felt fantastic. I got in touch with several cousins I hadn't spoken to in years around this period. As it happened, I was not the only one having problems with Elaine. One cousin described feeling excluded from family functions, and another informed me about Elaine's spreading of rumors about her following a small argument. Bonding over our common annoyances drew us closer, and seemed like I was reclaiming a piece of the family I had feared I had lost. Elaine, of course, never let up. Through mutual friends, I discovered she was circulating tales about me, calling me a bad daughter, and asserting I was only severing relations because I was jealous of her children. I decided against participating. Reacting would simply provide her more gasoline. I resolved not to sink to her level. In treatment, I discussed all that had happened and how I was managing it. My therapist noted my great improvement in establishing limits and giving my health top priority. Hearing it let me realize how far I had come from beginning treatment. I was not the same person who had labored years to get Dad's approval. At last, I was treating myself first. Over all of this, my mother remained a continual source of inspiration. She told me one evening of her pride in my development and fortitude. Though it seemed little, it meant the world to me. All else, I had her constant support, which was plenty. Unexpected contact offered some closure I never knew I needed. Michael crossed my path in a coffee cafe close by my workplace. He saw me, froze, then turned away fast as if he had not seen me. Though it was uncomfortable, it made one thing quite clear. Our relationship was irreparable, and I was cool with that. When I considered all that had transpired, my early years kept coming back to me. Though I had gone through so much, it had also strengthened me. Acknowledging my own fortitude, I felt good about how I had handled such a trying circumstance. The chance for a new beginning arrived unannounced. My firm gave me an opportunity to move to a new branch in another city. Though it was a significant action, it felt like the ideal approach to end this chapter of my life. I turned down the offer, then started getting ready for my next round of travel. though it was the one I needed. This was not the finale I had in mind from childhood. In years, I felt free for the first time. Changing cities was exactly the reset I needed. My first several weeks were a frenzy of unpacking, neighborhood exploration, and habit development. Being at a place where no one knew my story and where I could just be myself, free from the weight of my family's turmoil, was energizing. Through business, I began going to networking events. On a whim, I even joined a rock climbing group. Though I was not very good at it, learning anything new made me feel successful. The group was friendly, and soon I was befriending people who also loved adventure and personal development. Every ascent seemed symbolic, as if I was, one foothold at a time, bidding farewell to my past. Dad broke the quiet couple of months in. I was surprised when he sent me a protracted email. Though the tone was regretful as I went over it, I saw how much of it was about defending his behavior. He talked about how difficult it was to balance two families, how he thought I'd understand, and how he'd always tried his best. He admitted a few errors but framed them as required sacrifices for the greater good of his new family. It didn't fit me exactly. The email seemed more like an effort to relieve his own guilt than like an apology. Real responsibility was absent, and there was no recognition of the harm his decisions had done. Having twice read it, I chose not to respond. Engaging would merely reopen injuries I was trying to heal. I moved on, leaving the email unopened. Not long afterward, Sarah abruptly contacted me. She asked me to go to her wedding. It was almost here. She presented it as a chance to repair the family. Given our years apart, the conversation was tense. It felt more like an obligation she was trying to meet than like a real olive branch. I gently turned down, knowing that my presence would only make matters awkward for all those engaged. Word of my rejection went fast. Julia responded rather poorly, as expected. A cousin told me she was once more calling me selfish and blaming me for causing division in the family. By now it was almost humorous. I always played the villain in her story, regardless of what I did. Rather than allowing it to consume me, I saw it as more evidence that staying apart was the wise decision. At work, meanwhile, things were running better than they had ever done. I was assigned leadership of a sizable initiative that turned out to be rather successful. I received an award for my contributions at the quarterly conference of the corporation. It was a proud moment that confirmed I was doing something significant for me, entirely outside from my family's troubles. Not long afterward, my mother flew to see me. Having her present to celebrate my achievements felt like the best affirmation, as she had been my main supporter over this whole process. Over the weekend, we explored the city, tried new eateries, and reminisced over the distance traveled. She reminded me I was thriving, not merely existing. My therapist asked me during one of our sessions whether I would not require frequent visits going forward. She noted how much I had developed in controlling my feelings and establishing reasonable limitations. It seemed like a turning point, evidence that I was really headed forward. Knowing I could always return if necessary, I chose to pause therapy. During my path toward closure, I gave a local charity an old souvenir from my dad. I had kept this little sentimental object for years, but letting it go felt significant, as if I were shedding the last bit of emotional weight connected to our connection. In a sense, I hadn't anticipated. It was liberating. One of Julia's cousins sent an unannounced note. They said several members of the family had noticed Julia's manipulation for years and were sorry for not backing me earlier. They said they wanted me to know I wasn't alone, but they hadn't spoken up since they didn't want to start strife. Though it seemed little, hearing someone else affirm my experience meant a lot. I started seeing someone else fresh about this time. Early days, yet the relationship felt different, better. I became aware of how much more secure I was in expressing my demands and establishing limits, something I had battled before. I felt, for the first time, as though I was creating something free from the weight of my family's past. Looking back on everything that had transpired, I became appreciative of the fortitude I had developed. Though it had been essential, cutting ties with my dad's family hadn't been simple, more focused, healthier, and happier than I had ever been. Although I couldn't turn back the past, I was glad of how I had seized control of my present. This was my story, not defined by the suffering I had gone through, but by the development and fortitude I had found within myself. This marks my fresh start,